Well, without talking about any individual candidate, the issue with revamping and exposing what I refer to as the fraud and corruption, say, at the CDC, is that Congress has allowed people to do things, for example, like own parts of patents on drugs that they have oversight in mandating or recommending to Americans. There is a conflict of interest there that is so obvious that it's hard to imagine how that could go on, how an Anthony Fauci or Deborah Birx or Rick Bright could own a part of a patent on a medication that they then recommend. That needs to be overhauled.
All right, guys, happy Wednesday to you. Normally I say this is halfway through, and yes, technically you are, but tomorrow is Thanksgiving. A lot to be thankful for. What a great, great year we've had and an end to it. I mean, everybody's happy. I've so many exciting people talking about what's going on. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving. A lot to be thankful for. Obviously, I'll talk more about this tomorrow. Yes, we have a show tomorrow. Yes, we have a show Friday. So have your dinner, watch our show. At least turn it on. Give me the views. You know what I mean? Get the people gathered around. And Friday too, I know, but we got to keep the show going. Keep it going forward. So turn it on. Watch at 6 o'clock tomorrow. Watch it on Friday. Get your family involved. Spread the word. After dinner, come all together. Watch us. That's awesome. I appreciate that. Robert Wilkie is here. He's a former secretary of the VA, former undersecretary of DOD, but more important, he is leading the transition in the areas of the VA and DOD for Donald Trump. I want to get to him in just a second. You're going to be, I'm so excited for this conversation. Before that, I want to tell you, I get wound up all day. I've been telling you this before. I have trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, but all of that was solved when I got introduced to Beam's Dream Powder. Now, I love this flavor. This is the cinnamon cocoa one. There's a brownie one, and there's a brand new, check this out, white peppermint. Oh, unbelievable. Perfect time. You can officially have it now. The Christmas season is starting because, well, tomorrow. I have to wait till after Thanksgiving, but I'm getting there. Anyway, this stuff has everything that you've used in the past, probably if you're someone like melatonin, magnesium, reishi, apigenin, theanine, all that stuff, all the natural ingredients in an amazing amazing drink. I love this stuff. I put a scoop of it in water, throw it in the microwave for 30 seconds, 30 minutes before bed, and then bam, my head hits the pillow and I'm out. Wake up feeling completely refreshed. This is an all-natural, great tasting choice that you will love. Professional athletes and business executives all over the world have discovered this, and you can too. If you want to try it, Beam's Dream Powder, go to shopbeam.com/Spicer. Use code Spicer to get 40% off. Look, Black Friday's in 2 days. You can start shopping now. Go to shopbeam.com/Spicer. Use code Spicer for over 40% off. I would try all the flavors because I love them all. They're like your kids. You got to love them all. But try them. Tell me you're going to love it. Shopbeam.com. All right. Listen. The military has changed in the last 4 years. There's a lot of questions about our readiness. Are we ready for the fight? China is saying 2027, they're ready to go. Are we ready? I don't know. Robert Wilkie was the former undersecretary of the Department of Defense, the former secretary of the VA. He was brought in to lead the transition for Donald Trump. He is the guy that has been setting the policies for the last 4 years. If you want to know if our military is ready, what policies have to change, how things are going to be different on day one, you're going to want to hear this interview. We have interviews that no one else has. This is a guy who is leading the transition. You will hear this nowhere else. All right. I'm going to bring in Secretary Wilkie in a second, but before that, you guys have heard me talk about this before. I've gotten into wellness. We'll talk a little bit more about that later today, but I have some issues with my hips and my knees. I like to work out a lot. I go jogging. I don't call it running. And I got introduced to Gravity Defy shoes. What a game changer. I put them on when I went to play pickleball with producer Ronnie there because I knew I was going to get moving around the court. I now have 3 pairs of Gravity Defy shoes. I will be giving them as Christmas presents for friends and family members. Don't tell anyone. But these things are amazing. They've got this patented Verso technology in cushioning. It's the stuff they make trampolines with. Unbelievable support. They come with custom orthotics. I'm telling you, it's a game changer of a shoe. And they've got trainers, running shoes, walking shoes, sandals, the whole gamut. If you want to try these out, You will thank me later. Go to GDEFY, Gravity to Fire. It's just GDEFY.com. Use code SPICER30 for $30 off your order of $150 or more. GDEFY.com. Use code SPICER30. All right. Without further ado, I want to bring in the former Secretary of the VA, former Undersecretary of the Department of Defense, and the man leading the DOD and VA transition for Donald Trump, Secretary Robert Wilkie. Mr. Secretary, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Sean.
So, one of the points that I keep making to folks is that the past 4 years have not been just wasted. People like you have spent a lot of time building out policies and addressing concerns. So just take us behind the curtain for a second and explain what has been happening during the past 4 years to get us ready for the next Trump administration.
Sure. Well, let me give credit first to friends of yours, Brooke Rollins and Linda McMahon, who had this idea to create a think tank that's unlike most of the think tanks in Washington, in that it was to be populated by practitioners and not theoreticians. And the goal was to prepare for the next, hopefully, Trump administration. And of course, that has now happened. And so for 2 years, we started building a transition plan, policy transition plan, executive orders, secretarial directives, drafting regulations, so that on day one, the president would be able to launch a comprehensive assault on not only what was left of the Biden administration, but the damage that Biden, and I would go back as far as Obama Biden, has done to the people of the United States. That's what's different. This has been a lengthy process. And to give you an example, when President Trump entered office, and you were there was no great preparation because nobody expected him to win, particularly the professional Republicans in this town. And then when he did win, they all wanted to get on the bandwagon. But the things that needed to be done to prepare for an entry into the Oval Office were not done. So that on day one, he had 1, 2, maybe 3 executive orders. He's going to have several dozen this time. And the regulations to back those executive orders up, as well as the secretarial directives. I imagine, and I'm not speaking officially for him, I think the first one will be to open up America's energy spigots with the end goal not only of reducing prices here, but breaking the back of the Iranian economy and breaking the funding and the financial stream to Putin's war machine. That's going to send shockwaves throughout that part of the world with China's 2 smaller proxies.
It's interesting because I guess what I'm hearing you say, you tell me if I'm wrong, is that by reinvigorating our energy sector, it's a national security issue.
Oh, it is very much a national security issue. I'll give you an example. When President Trump was in office, oil was somewhere around below $40 a barrel. What did that do? Putin had pegged his economy using a traditional Soviet 5-year plan on oil being $100 a barrel or more. When it hit 38, 37, 36, his economy collapsed in on itself. The Iranians, when President Trump left, had $5 billion left in their treasury. Now, what did Joe Biden do? He cut off the spigots. Oil went way over $100 a barrel. And in the meantime, he handed the Iranians hundreds of billions of dollars in taxpayer funds to buy them off. And now the Iranians are actually producing more oil than they did when the Shah was in his last few years, because Joe Biden won't enforce any sanctions. Sanctions, by the way, that were approved by the United Nations.
So let's get into some of these other politics. Actually, I want to start with this. You've got all these policies that you mentioned, executive orders, policies in general, secretariat memos. How does this work? Like, you guys do all this stuff. Does it get presented to President Trump to say, hey, here's 15 things you could do. You tell us what you want us to do, or we just hand them over to your transition team?
Yeah.
How does the process work to take all the work that you've done for 4 years and then kind of turn it over to them?
So I'm responsible for both VA and DoD policy transition. What I've been able to do is just transfer, as you mentioned, the work that we've been doing for 2 years into the policy documents that will guide the next administration. So that work for 2 years is now in place. And I'll make one, I think, silly comment. And I say it's silly because it sounds like I'm being vindictive. I'm not. The press ignored us, and we were happy to have the press ignore us. They went down more different rat holes, and we just sat there and watched them because they were marching to the traditional Washington beat, academic on top of academics, producing papers that nobody would read, and in the meantime, we had cabinet secretaries and senior military officials writing the guidebook for what will be the next 4 years.
So I think there's several aspects of our national security that might be concerning right now. I'll take Afghanistan maybe to start with.
Yeah.
That withdrawal, I think, laid the groundwork for so many of the other things that happened around the world because they saw our leadership as feckless and didn't see it as strong.
Right.
How do we address that perception that we're not leading with strength?
Well, of course, the main goal of the new Trump administration will be to restore the deterrent power of the armed forces. That would be nowhere clearer made manifest than in the Middle East. And I mean by that, the Houthis have attacked American ships and troops over 200 times under Biden. There's been no concerted response from the armed forces. When we did respond, we told the Houthis we were coming. We would attack at 2 or 3 in the morning to hit an empty warehouse so there would be no casualties. Nothing signaled weakness on top of the Afghanistan withdrawal, more than that. And remember what the Iranians had and the Russians had experienced under Donald Trump, because you were there for part of the time. When Putin's forces got too close to Americans in the Syrian desert, he was told to back off. He didn't, and 300 of his troops were killed. When the Iranians started flexing their muscles with their proxies, and missiles were launched by their proxies at American bases in the Middle East, guess what happened? Soleimani vaporized on the apron of a Baghdad runway. The Chinese were on their side of the straits because they knew this guy meant business. And it was fascinating for me, and this is a tangential comment, because if you look at the books behind me, I've spent a lifetime studying this. I was born in khaki diapers. The military has been my life. Donald Trump didn't study any of this. He was a real estate man, a businessman. But instinctively, he knew how to press the levers of American power to keep the other side off balance. And really, that was a negotiating tool. And I'll give you an example of how even the West doesn't understand what's going on. Our friends, the French. I was confronted by a senior major general in French intelligence who was very upset that Donald Trump had said, look, if you don't pay your freight in NATO, the Russians can have you because we're not going to come to your rescue. And he was just ranting and raving about the position of France in the world. I said, well, as an intelligence officer, you just failed in your first mission. You didn't read the man's book.
I love it. I talked to new. I mean,
the man's book.
Do you know how? I'm so glad you brought that up. I've brought this up in the past. He is so transparent. It's in the art of the deal, the art of the comeback, like his tweets, the idea that, to your point, an intelligence officer doesn't take the raw intelligence in front of their face. Oh, I love it. I love it.
So I told him, if you read the book, you would know that the first part of the deal is to make a statement that staggers the other side, and then you control the pace of the debate. They still didn't understand it, but then again, we're talking about France.
All right, so let's go to the readiness of our military. How has that changed from the day that Donald Trump left office to today?
I'll put it plainly, Sean, and I've said this in many different venues. You and I grew up around what we accepted as a profession of arms, an endeavor that includes the study of history, politics, grand strategy, involves physical fitness. The Biden administration's view of the armed forces is that it's just another jobs program. They lowered the standards for physical fitness, they lowered the standards for admission, so that we have now a force in many respects. Well, I'll give you an example. Under the current Pentagon leadership, you can pass the Biden Army physical fitness test with 10 push-ups and 2 miles in 25 minutes. Now, the average American 65-year-old can walk a mile in 12 minutes.
Those are for men, right?
And those are for men.
Yeah, I was told a woman only has to do 2.
Yes. So you're also, it's funny because these great champions of feminism have degraded the achievements of warriors who happen to be women, who went through the rigorous training and qualification. And now they're saying, no, that doesn't matter anymore. The Secretary of the Army said that she didn't have higher physical fitness standards because that somehow wars against underrepresented groups. Well, I'll tell you what she's going to get. She's going to get overrepresented groups, and that's dead on the battlefield. Because if the Russians have taught us anything, it is what war looks like when we use troops as fodder. These infantry swarm tactics that they're using to the tune of losing between 1,700 and 2,000 people a day. Untrained, underfit, ill-equipped, and they're dying by the bushel. That's the kind of path we would have continued on if Biden and Harris, or Harris in this case, had stayed in office. It is something that is underreported and underappreciated.
I know one of the things that members of the transition have talked about is readiness, in the sense that these folks are being given a lot of training on DEI,
Right.
diversity, equity, and inclusion, which, as opposed to being warfighter ready. So let me just start with the first question. If we were attacked today, is our military ready for the fight?
Some elements are. I'm not going to label the ones I don't think are ready, but many of our units are ready. I mean, all you have to do is go to Fort Bragg, and President Trump's promised that it's going to be Fort Bragg again. And you look at the All-American Division, you look at the Army Special Operations Command. Those units are fine, but it is other elements that have succumbed to the destruction of the warrior ethic, lack of the destruction of the meritocracy of the service. That is what we see everywhere from, as you mentioned, day one in basic training to day one at the United States Military Academy. All you have to do is go to Fort Sill, where the Army has one of its basic training facilities, and look at the agenda for the first week. They teach you about pronouns. They teach you about white supremacy. And one thing I'll say about that is nothing signals to the world American weakness than appreciating an American leadership that denigrates its own nation's history. And the classic example is not a military example, but you and I have talked about this. When the Chinese foreign minister first met Anthony Blinken in Alaska on American soil, all he did in the first 30 minutes was to berate Blinken by using Biden's speeches, Harris's comments, that America was an oppressive, racist country responsible for most of the world's problems. Now, the only thing that Blinken could do is mouth a bunch of faculty lounge pieties about how America needs to do better. Now, Had that been Richard Nixon or Ronald Reagan or Donald Trump, the response would have been, as the American was getting up out of the chair to leave, the United States is not lectured by a country that's murdered 100 million of its own people since 1949. If you can't defend the nation rhetorically, you sure ain't going to defend it kinetically.
Right. So what happens? Is it just that we, on day 1 or day 10, Donald Trump and his team at the Pentagon get rid of this training? Is that step 1? Or what are are the people who taught it? Are the contractors who came up with it? Like, are there consequences, or is it just that it gets ended?
Yeah. First of all, let's say that that's Executive Order 2, 3, or 4, and that will be delivered in the form of reinforcing secretarial directives in each department. For the military, it will be an immediate cease and desist. I could envision, and again, I'm not speaking officially, every contractor involved in this is fired on the spot. Let go. Any soldiers, sailors, airmen.
Any contractor that's done any work, or any contractor doing DEI work?
Doing the work. Yeah. I mean, but I'm talking about, first of all, the outside appendages,
right,
that have been brought in to spill this. I'll just say it, spill this poison that is ripping the nation apart. And now you slowly see corporate America saying enough is enough. I think we had 2 more big Fortune 500 companies yesterday say no more. So you let go all of those people. You send back to the regular military any lower ranking individual who's been told to teach this nonsense or promulgate it, and send them back to a real job. And the consequences or the effect of that will be felt on day 1. The military does one thing: it does respond to orders. And I do think that the culture, people will want to get back to serious training.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons, separate apart from Afghanistan, that we've experienced the lowest recruiting numbers since the all-volunteer force was created in 1973 is that those traditional wells of recruitment, primarily red states, the parents are saying, we're not going to send our children to a force that's divided along racial, ethnic, and sexual categories.
So what about, so the people, like, okay, so is there accountability? I get the contractors, but what about the officers that have led this, the leaders that have done this? Is this just political folks that when they're gone, it goes, or are there people within the ranks that also need to be held accountable for the focus?
Well, certainly the political folks from Biden and Harris have been driving this. Right. The question will be in reviewing the performance of officers in particular, whether or not they've bought this hook, line, and sinker. But the message will be sent. And look, this permeates everything from basic training to the military academies.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get a minor in diversity, equity, inclusion in our military academy.
What? Wait. Are you, so you can, your degree can say diversity, equity, inclusion? Like, I'm here to fight for the country, but I'm also have a minor.
You can minor in it. In fact, I'm looking at the descriptions from the Air Force Academy. The Academy has a chief diversity officer. The academic precinct serves DEI. Cadets can earn a minor in diversity and inclusion and are encouraged to attend a local Black Lives Matter meeting. Let me address.
Just let that sink in.
Yeah.
The Air Force Academy is telling cadets, go to a BLM meeting.
Yeah. So on day 1, that superintendent is going to be ordered to get rid of DEI and all the apparatus that comes with it to make sure that doesn't happen again. Now let me just address what a revolutionary thing that statement is that you just highlighted. The American tradition, unlike the British tradition, the French tradition, any of those, we don't swear an allegiance to an individual. We swear an allegiance to the Constitution. And that compact between the officer and that Constitution, our Constitution, has always meant that the officers of the armed forces do not engage in politics. I mean, I didn't even know my father voted until I was an adult. Ike voted for the first time when he was running for president. There's a famous story, Sean, about, I don't know if you remember from your naval history, when the North Koreans captured our special ship, the Pueblo, toward the end of the 1960s. I think it was the last year of the Johnson administration. Some cadet, senior cadet at West Point, drew a map of North Korea and a mushroom cloud over Pyongyang and stuck it on his door in the barracks at West Point. The next day, the commandant of cadets came by, took it off, and said, "Son, this is the United States military. We don't do politics, even if we agree with your sentiment." We've seen Mark Milley, the leaders of our academy, certain members of the Joint Chiefs make political pronouncements to further divide the force. I mean, I have a memo sitting right over here, signed by the then chief of staff of the Air Force, who says, "I only want 43% white pilots."
Who's now
the
chairman of the Joint Chiefs.
That's the kind of thing that gets people killed. Because when you place identity above merit, this is the one profession where civilian standards of fairness do not apply, because body bags get filled real fast. And one last quick historical comparison. If you don't believe this has happened before, in France, the beginning of the 20th century, when the socialists came to power, this sounds familiar, they did what was called the red card attack. They went into the files of every senior colonel, general in the French army, which I think at that time was the largest in the world. And if you came from a Catholic family, which most French officers did, if you had a monarchist past, the red card went right into your file. And they started purging those officers who didn't meet the political needs of the socialists who had taken over the government. And what happened when the Germans attacked? The ones that they had promoted over the experienced officers were the ones who led to the slaughters of the first year of World War I, and all those generals and colonels that they had fired for political beliefs were called back as part of an emergency to save France. So if somebody says this is just peripheral, ephemeral stuff, it's happened in Western civilization. And Donald Trump's election is guaranteed they can't go any deeper than they have.
One other policy that has been discussed, I'm going to read you a tweet that was sent out. It says, President-elect Donald Trump plans executive order to remove all transgenders from the U.S. military. The Times, I guess it's the Military Times. It would also ban trans people from joining the military. The order could come on his first day back in the White House, January 20. They are believed to be about 15,000 active service personnel who are transgender, which I actually had no clue.
That's nonsensical. Let me answer that, Sean. I've seen the executive orders. I mentioned we've been working on them for 2 years. I've never seen an executive order like that. I would.
Okay, so just to be clear, does that mean that at least initially there's no plans to reverse the decision to allow?
Let's go back, and I'm not speaking for Mr. Trump officially, but what was his policy when he was in office the first time? There was no transgender accession.
Right.
So I would not be shocked if on day one that directive goes back into effect, that regulation. But the purging, I've heard look. Let me just say this, and I'm way out on. and from the Military Times and Stars and Stripes, sadly, are appendages of the Democratic Party.
Right.
They are constantly attacking Republicans, conservatives. They hold no brief for the soldier. They are just another left-wing yellow sheet. And I've seen a couple of these stories. They're certainly not coming from anything that we have drafted, but they're designed to create problems. So, in fact, you mentioned I was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal, and one of the questions I received, well, it looks like Mr. Trump would purge the military of homosexual soldiers. I said, you don't even understand Donald Trump. I mean, he had the first openly gay member of his cabinet in the American history. This is not Donald Trump. And this kind of identity nonsense is what killed Kamala Harris, because people are tired of it. Donald Trump's not going to purge homosexual soldiers. In fact, he's probably been the most welcoming president who actually means it when it comes to opening all positions in government for merit, regardless of what people profess.
But do you think that do you think it's the same to talk about whether or not you're gay to serve?
No, but they're conflating the two, and that's because if you remember in that interview, I got hit with transgender and homosexuality in the same sentence.
So, but do you think it's so? So the accession piece, that's joining the military, he obviously is likely to revert to his old policy. But then what happens to everyone that's been in the last 4 years?
The same thing that happens to every other soldier. Are you physically fit? Are you mentally fit? We're not giving anyone any special treatment. And I think that's going to be the great leveler. And that 15,000 figure is just
that seems
that's nonsensical. I mean, I just retired after 28 years. I cannot believe that that's a number. That's something like the Kinsey numbers that came out of there.
I think that's a. Let's talk about the generals and then Milley specifically, because there's a lot of talk that Trump should look at the generals who handled Afghanistan. They should look at Milley, who he's got some problems with, and call them back to active duty if they've retired, to have them held accountable for decisions they made, whether it's Afghanistan or in General Milley's case, calls he made to the Chinese. Right. What do you guys have any? Did you make any recommendations? Do you have any intel and where his head is?
We don't have any executive orders along those lines, particularly the ones that we've drafted. I haven't seen any. I would advise against it. That's not part of the American tradition. And what I would say about Afghanistan, and we certainly have to look closely. Let me just give you an example. We have more generals and admirals today with 2 million people under arms than we did when Japan surrendered and we had 16 million people under arms. We're top heavy. We need to get rid of a lot of them, as well as cull down the staffs in the Pentagon and get these people back into the field doing real soldiering and being real sailors. So that's certainly part of it. And I also think that the incoming Secretary of Defense will have to review the performance, certainly at the secretarial level with 3s and 4 stars. Are these people performing? And before the press goes nuts, and then you see Military Times and Stars and Stripes performing their usual ahistorical dance. This has been done quite often in American history. Of course, the most famous was by George C. Marshall, who was pulled from way down the ranks in terms of seniority and told by Franklin Roosevelt to clean it up. He fired generals who were not physically fit. He fired generals who were too old. He fired generals who were not with the program, generals who were not mentally agile. That's the kind of top-down review that needs to take place. Star chambers are not part of the American military tradition, but this kind of review is. And I think that needs to be done immediately. And I would hope that the Secretary of Defense, whomever he is, um, conducts that review and puts people on notice.
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, hey, the President Trump's been palling around with Elon Musk. They're calling him the first buddy down at Mar-a-Lago. There's a story that I wanted to get your take on. It says that Musk targets Trump's favorite fighter jet. Drones, not jets, are the future of aerial combat, according to Musk. And it says that Elon Musk is tearing in the F-35, the most expensive weapon system in history, in a favor of his new best friend, President-elect Donald Trump. In a series of posts on X, the world's richest man and a proponent of driverless cars targeted the tri-service fighter jet program while coming out in favor of uncrewed aircraft.
Well,
what are your thoughts on that as an Air Force colonel?
Sure. Well, let's just look at the Navy first.
Huh.
The Ukrainians, without a surface fleet, have destroyed the Black Sea Fleet. Russia's crown jewels of surface ships without a navy. They've done it by drone strikes, mass drone strikes, undersea drone strikes, floating drone strikes. That's certainly the wave of the future, but Musk is hitting on a bigger problem. The budgeting and acquisition program of the Pentagon was put in place before I was born. It was the product of Robert McNamara's experience as the CEO of Ford Motor Company in the 1950s, an industrial age process. You've been around special forces. You know that the capabilities they have really rests in part on the agility that they are given to buy things off the shelf, to experiment, to go into the private sector anywhere they can find it, and get the tools that they need to fight. That's what needs to happen at the Pentagon. And I'll give you another Navy example, and then I'll go to the Air Force. Now, I may be enraging people right now, particularly the senior leadership of the Navy. But we now have a Gerald Ford class carrier that has yet to come out of dry dock that started off at $7 billion. It's now over $15 billion. I could put 5 or 6 nuclear attack submarines in the South China Sea for the cost of that one aircraft carrier. We need to make sure that we're spending our dollars on those weapon systems that will will scare the Chinese and every other bad actor. And no program should be immune. The aircraft carrier or the F-35, it's a new age, and the dollar is is shrinking in terms of what's available for the Pentagon. And if we don't go through these drastic revisions in the way the Pentagon does business, then we're going to be in serious trouble.
Yeah. Secretary Wilkie, thank you for your service to the country. Thanks for everything you've done for President-elect Donald Trump to get him off on an amazing start to his second term. I don't think it can be understated the spade work that you and your team have done the last 4 years to make sure this administration hits the ground running. So thank you for your continued service to the country and for joining us here today. And I wish you and your family a very, very happy and safe Thanksgiving.
You too, Sean. And I'll say one thing quick. I've learned a lot from you. I've watched you in day-to-day combat, and I have learned from the feet of the master, at the feet of the master.
Well, greatly appreciated. It's an honor to have someone like you say that. So appreciate you being with us once again, and again, have a very, very happy Thanksgiving.
You too.
That was a great conversation. Before I bring in our next guest and talk a little bit about healthy living the day before Thanksgiving, I want to tell you about my personal journey. I've struggled with weight my whole life. I think I've been honest with you guys about that. You know about that. I got introduced to PhD weight loss, and it's not a fad diet because I've tried them all: Atkins, keto, Mediterranean, intermittent fasting. I've done everything. What I love about PhD weight loss is that it's a one-on-one nutritional consulting process. They sit down with you. They get to know you. What do you like to eat? When do you like to eat? What do you crave? And they craft a plan for you that's a lifestyle change. They talk about, here's how we're going to get your weight down, then here's how we're going to maintain it. And they work with you to make that happen. There's accountability, there's weigh-ins and check-ins every week so that you know that you're accountable to, sticking to the plan. But it's a manageable plan. It's a lifestyle change. It's not a fad. And that's why I like the PhD weight loss. You can try calling them at 1-864-644-1900 or go online to myphdweightloss.com, myphdweightloss.com. Trust me, you've seen, I'm down 4 or 5 pounds already. Sebastian Gorka, he's done it. He looks great. This is a plan that you are really going to enjoy because it's a lifestyle change, not a fad diet. All right. Now I want to bring in Dr. Kelly Victory, the Chief of Disaster and Emergency Medicine at the Wellness Company, to talk a little bit about the MAHA agenda and where it is. Dr. Victory, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me, Sean.
All right, I want to talk about the RFK nomination to start with. You've got these liberal groups, big pharma, big food. Everybody's losing their mind, and they're spending aggressively to expose him. What are your thoughts on, will he actually make it through this process?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think that the nomination of Robert Kennedy Jr. was a brilliant one from the Trump team, and I certainly hope that he makes it through the process. I think that he will clearly provide not only leadership, but insight into what has been going on, not just in the past 4 years, but for decades in healthcare. We need a complete overhaul, a revamp of all of our 3-letter institutions, the CDC, FDA, NIH. They all are corrupt. They're inbred. There are processes that go on there and policies that need to be implemented to eradicate some of the conflicts of interest that have gone on and that have fundamentally allowed things to happen and be brought forth to the public that are neither safe nor effective. This goes on way before, Sean, the issues that we saw with the mRNA injections for COVID. This has to do with everything, including gain of function research and lack of safety testing on a host of medications and vaccines. So there's no question that Bobby Kennedy Jr. has scared a lot of people. And those are the people who stand to make a lot of money, who have been in control, as I said, many of them for many decades. And there's going to be a new sheriff in town if he is nominated. And I think it will be a very good thing for Americans and for our healthcare system.
Yeah, I love you pointed out the obvious. All these people are scared who make a boatload of money off the status quo and the system. And the idea of somebody coming up and shaking that tree scares the heck out of you. You mentioned the 3-letter agencies. When I was a young staffer on Capitol Hill, Dave Weldon was a congressman from Florida. He's a doctor. He served up there. He's been tapped to lead the CDC, one of those 3-letter agencies. Explain to us how important this is for the medical community and why it matters.
Well, without talking about any individual candidate, the issue with revamping and exposing what I refer to as the fraud and corruption, say, at the CDC, is that Congress has allowed people to do things, for example, like own parts of patents on drugs that they have oversight in mandating or recommending to Americans. There is a conflict of interest there that is so obvious that it's hard to imagine how that could go on, how an Anthony Fauci or Deborah Birx or Rick Bright could own a part of a patent on a medication that they then recommend. That needs to be overhauled. We have
just stop and think about this for a second. So you are in the government, you are helping to approve stuff, and you can own part of the patent?
Correct. This has been allowed to go on for decades. We have things like the National Childhood Vaccine Act that was passed in 1986 by Congress to motivate companies to make vaccines, but it gave them blanket immunity, blanket protection so that they cannot be sued or otherwise pursued if you're injured. Can you imagine buying a car seat that said on the outside, if your child is maimed or killed by a malfunction of this car seat, good luck to you because you have no recourse? I wouldn't buy that car seat. Why in the world would we allow that to happen for something as prominent as vaccines? Then we have the issue of gain of function research, and whoever heads up the NIH hopefully will really take a close look at that. I didn't agree with a lot of what happened under the Obama administration, but I absolutely supported the moratorium that President Obama put on gain-of-function research, which is fundamentally the weaponization of a pathogen. It's taking a bacterium or a virus and making it more transmissible, more infectious, more difficult to treat. And that is going on right now with things like the bird flu. This is insanity. So we need every one of these different agencies to be completely overhauled. We need to kick out those people who are involved in things like censorship and suppressing information that people like myself tried to bring to the public during the past 5 years. And I believe Bobby Kennedy is the perfect person to lead the entire charge and then get the individuals in place to do the individual agencies.
Yeah, a lot of great individuals at those three-letter agencies that I think a lot of people are excited for and the establishment is scared of. By the way, I love what you guys do at the Wellness Company because you're really taking personal health away from the government, putting it back in the hands of people, giving them the tools they need. I just want to mention this. You've got everything from medical kits to supplements, virtual health visits. It's so cool how you guys are approaching medicine. I think basically you're on the forefront of the future of medicine, really putting it back in the hands of the patients and the individuals. I love it. And if people are interested in checking out the products there, you can go to twc.health/the1st, enter promo code the first. They've got kits for everything. First aid, emergency. You name it, from bug bites to scrapes to actual bird flu. You guys can get everything addressed from the Wellness Company. So Dr. Victory, thanks for being with us and thanks for all you guys are doing to get us back in power of our own medical decisions.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it, Sean.
You bet. Take care. All right, guys, thanks for joining us. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving. We got a great show headed your way. Please tune in at 6 and 6 o'clock on Friday. Steve Bannon's going to be here. It's going to be epic as always. Friday, 6 o'clock tomorrow. Have a good Thanksgiving if I don't see you before your meal, but do tune in at 6 o'clock tomorrow night. See you back here then. Have a happy Thanksgiving in the meantime. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.